Hello everyone, welcome to today's class. Today we will be covering chapter 13 of the book and we will talk about firms and competitive markets. So we will define what a competitive market is and how firms decide on its production level given the market condition being competitive. And this chapter will help us understand how firms behave in a situation or in a market condition when there is competition in the market, and how they decide upon the level of their production in order to maximize the profit that they are gaining. We will also talk about temporarily shutdown of business, and also in the long run why firms decide to exit the market, and we will build upon the things that we have learned in the previous chapter about the cost of production, and this chapter will also help us to understand how firms behave when there is no market competition, for example in case of monopoly that we will cover in the coming chapter. So in this chapter we will talk about what is perfectly competitive market. In the last chapter we talk about different type of costs. In order to fully understand profit, we also have to have an idea about revenue. So we will briefly talk about marginal revenue and as well as average revenue in this chapter as well. And the main point, another main point is here is that how a competitive firm determines the quantity that maximizes profit. So if there is a firm in a competitive market, how it should or how it can determine how much to produce in order to maximize our profit. How much of goods and services should I produce so that my profit is maximum. And the next point we will talk about market exit and market shutdown. So we will see what does that mean if a firm shuts down, or when a firm decides to exit the market. We will discuss these two terms as well. And later on we will talk about the market supply. Market supply is the whole supply of different firms in a market. So it's an aggregate supply, and we will see how the supply curve is basically derived first, and then we will also see how the supply curve changes from short run into the long run. So we will have a comparative analysis of short-run market supply as well as long-run market supply. Yeah, so imagine that you're starting a business, and then there are a lot of questions that you have to answer with yourself, and you have to decide how much do you want to produce, what should be the price of that product, and how many workers would you like to hire, for example. In order to make these decisions, the following factors affect your decision. First is your cost. So if you're starting a business, the main thing is that you have to consider what are the costs associated with your business. And we have covered this in the last chapter, so you know different type of costs. The next question is how much competition you face. So obviously there are already other suppliers of the same good or services in the market, so you will probably not be the only person producing that good or service. And the level of competition in the market also affects your decision. So that's also another aspect that you have to consider. Okay, so here we will quickly talk about revenue, how revenue is calculated for a firm in a competitive market. So the first term is total revenue. So of course total revenue is price multiplied by quantity. So you multiply the price of your product by the quantity that you have sold. Average revenue, it's indicated by AR. It's equals to total revenue divided by quantity. So if you divide your total revenue by the quantity, you get the average revenue of your product. And marginal revenue, it's the change in total revenue divided by change in quantity. So how much your revenue changes if you produce one more unit or if you produce one less unit of your product. So that's basically the marginal revenue. So marginal revenue is the change in total revenue from one additional unit sold. Okay, then we come to this next point. For competitive firms, average revenue equals price and marginal revenue equal price. So these two equations are quite important for this chapter because that's how competitive firms are recognized, or how competitive firms are being recognized. This concept will be much more clearer once we go through exams, and as you see hopefully the graphs in the coming slides. So for now, if you remember, we just said that in competitive firms, producers and buyers, they are price takers, so the price is already given to them. Now consider the average revenue. So consider you are a producer of a milk product. So your average revenue is basically the revenue that you get from selling a liter of milk, and that's the average revenue that you will receive from selling of a liter of milk. And the money that you receive is basically the price of that product. So if you sell 1 liter of milk and the price of 1 liter milk is 2 euros, your average revenue is basically 2 euros, which is equal to the price of that product. Of course, if you produce 2 liters, then you will receive 4 euros. But again, the average revenue is 2 euros, because if you divide 2 by 4, it's again 2 euros. And it's the same with marginal revenue. So if you sell 1 extra unit of 1 extra liter of milk, you will basically receive the price of 1 extra liter of milk, and the price is already set by the market. So everyone knows that 1 liter of milk is for 2 euros. So your additional revenue for selling 1 extra liter of milk is basically the price that you're receiving, or that 2 euros. So that's the main idea behind it. And you will see with the help of example and in the graph, and it will be much clearer for you. So this is one active learning, and the quantity, price, total revenue, average revenue, and marginal revenue are given. You can pause this video and calculate it, or you can see the results given there. So from this active learning, you can also see how average revenue and marginal revenue are equal. So you see the price of this product is 10 euros, and then you see the total revenue and also average revenue and marginal revenue. And as you can see, the average revenue always remain 10 euro as well as marginal revenue. So doesn't matter how much quantity you are selling, your average revenue and marginal revenue will remain the same. So why it is the case that this is the case that the marginal revenue is equal to the price? It's because the level of production of a firm does not affect the price of that, the market price of that product. So it doesn't matter how much milk you are producing, you are just one another producer among thousands of milk producers, and then it doesn't matter if you produce much in a larger quantity or a small quantity. The amount that you produce basically has no effect on the market price. Why? Because you are too small to influence the price of a market. You cannot say, okay, I will produce less, so there is more. So I can increase the price. That's not the case. People will buy from other producers, so you are not the only producer of the milk in this case. So a competitive firm can keep increasing its output without affecting the market price. So you can produce as much as you want, the market price will not change. So each 1 unit increase in quantity causes revenue to rise by P. So of course, if you are producing 1 extra liter of milk, the revenue that you receive is the price of that 1 extra liter of milk, and that's basically your marginal revenue, which is equal to price. And this formula that marginal revenue is equal to price is only for the firms in competitive markets. As we will see in the coming chapters, other firms, for example, it's not the case for monopoly, and it only applies to competitive firms, and we will talk about it in its chapter when we are there. So as a firm, you see that you can produce as much as you want and your price will not change. So the next question would be, okay, how much should you produce? How much of the quantity you should produce in order to maximize your own firm's profit? So we will try to see and try to find how we can maximize our profit by choosing a given level of output or a given level of supply that will basically maximize our profit. So one concept is to think at the margin. So you see, if you produce 1 extra unit, how much your revenue will increase and how much your cost increase. So you are just thinking about the marginal changes in your revenue and cost. So that's one way of choosing the maximum, choosing the quantity which will maximize your profit. So we already knew, like, if the quantity of producing one good increases by 1 unit, your revenue is also increases by the marginal revenue, and your cost will rise by marginal cost. So if you produce one more unit, your revenue is basically your marginal revenue, and your cost is your marginal cost. So now you can compare your marginal revenue with marginal cost. And if you see that your marginal revenue is greater than your marginal cost, so your revenue is more than your cost, you should increase your output to raise profit. What that it means is, if you produce 1 extra liter of milk, and producing of this 1 extra liter of milk, you receive more money as compared to the cost of producing that 1 liter of milk. That means that you can still maximize or increase your profit by increasing your production level. So I will state it again. So just a simple example. So if you sell 1 liter of milk, your revenue is €2 for that 1 extra liter of milk, but your cost is only €1. So if you produce 1 liter of milk, your profit will increase by €1. That's the case when marginal revenue is greater than marginal cost. That means, like, if you produce 1 extra liter of milk, your profit will increase by €1. And that means that you can increase your profit by producing more and more. So in this case, you should produce more. Why? Because your profit is increasing. And as you produce more and more, at some unit of time, you will also see that your marginal revenue is smaller than your marginal cost. Or if you are producing 1 unit and your marginal revenue is smaller than your marginal cost, that means, like, you should decrease your production in order to maximize your profit. That means that you are incurring costs by producing more. In the example of milk, so your marginal revenue is €2, but by producing this 1 extra liter of milk, you are paying €3 for that, and that means that you are basically losing €1 of profit. And for you, it's better to reduce your production in order to maximize your profit. So when at the point where your marginal revenue and marginal cost are equal, this point is the level of production that will maximize your profit. So this is one of the main formula that you should always remember for a competitive firm, that a profit maximizing quantity is where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. So your cost and revenue, both of them are equal. And once they are equal, that is the level of production or the level of output which will maximize your profit. We are talking about the concepts now, but we will see them in graph, and that will be much more clearer as we continue. So that's from the earlier exercise, and just to give you a numerical example of how these calculations work. At any Q with marginal revenue greater than marginal cost, increasing quantity raises profit. So that means like if you're producing in the profit column, so if you're producing 1 unit, your profit is 1. You produce 2 units, your profit is increasing, it's 5. You produce 3 units and your profit in the profit column is increasing by 7. So till this point your profit is increasing. But if you're producing 4 units, your profit is not increasing, it's the same. And if you're producing the 5th unit, your profit is basically is reduced, it's again 5. So you should not produce the 5th unit. Why? Because it reduces your profit. And at any quantity with marginal revenue smaller than marginal cost, reducing quantity raises profit. So as the example of producing quantity 5, as you can see, your marginal revenue is 10, but your marginal cost is 12. So your profit is decreasing by -2. And you can see this change in profit in the last column. And by producing between 3 and 4, basically your profit is maximum. So your profit is could be maximum. It cannot. So if you go one step further and produce 1 extra unit, your profit will basically reduce. So now we can see this concept in a graph, and that will be much more easier to understand. First, this red line is the marginal revenue line. We have said that the price, so the P1 is the price, and the price is given by the market, so it does not change. And that's also basically your marginal revenue. And then you have the marginal cost curve, which is slopes upward. So as you produce more and more quantities, your cost will also increase. So at the point QA, your marginal cost is lower as compared to the marginal revenue, which is the dot on the red line. So at this point, you can increase your profit by producing more. Why? Because your cost is lower than your revenue. Let's take another level of quantity, quantity B. So at this point, your marginal revenue is lower as compared to your marginal cost. That means that in order to increase your profit, you should reduce your production. Why? Because if you are producing 1 extra liter of milk, that marginal cost, or the cost of producing 1 extra liter of milk, is much more higher than the marginal revenue or than the price that you are receiving for it. So in order to increase your profit, you should produce less. And what will be the profit maximizing quantity to produce? That is Q1. At this point, your marginal revenue and marginal cost, they are equal. So of course, you are not incurring more cost if you produce more, and you are not incurring any losses, or you are not foregoing any profit if you produce lower than this point. So at this point, it's basically the profit maximization point of production, and at this point is where the marginal cost curve is equal to marginal revenue. So as a rule, marginal revenue equal marginal cost at the profit maximizing quantity. Okay, now let's add one extra level of analysis to this graph. Now we are talking about the marginal cost in the firm's supply decision. So how a firm decide how much to supply or how much to produce a specific good. So now imagine that the price of that good has risen from P1 to P2. Now we have marginal revenue 2, so it's the new red line above. Then the profit maximizing quantity raises to Q2. So because we have a new marginal revenue curve, we can also have a new equilibrium where marginal cost equals marginal revenue. And as we make this move along the MC curve, the marginal cost curve, we are producing more quantities. So the quantity raises from Q1 to Q2. And basically that's the basic law of supply. So when the price is increasing, so you can see that P1, the price has increased from P1 to P2. The quantity produced will also increase from Q1 to Q2. And if you see the marginal cost curve determines the firm's quantity at any price. So if you compare these 2 points, you can see that basically the main determinant of how much quantity a firm will produce is basically decided by marginal cost given different prices. So the marginal cost is in a competitive firm is also the supply curve of a firm. Why? Because it shows how different quantities would be produced given different prices. We just give the example of a change in the price, and we saw that when the price changes, the quantity also changes, and that's all lies on the marginal cost curve. So that's basically also the same as the supply curve of this firm. And marginal cost basically decides how much a firm will produce at a different price level. So therefore, the marginal cost curve is the firm's supply curve. So based on this calculation, these are the two identical terms that could be used for the firm's supply curve. Okay, now we will move to a slightly different topic. Now we will talk about shutdown and exit. Basically, we have talked about, okay, if you're having a firm, how you can maximize your profit. Now we will see in which situation a firm will shut down or will exit a market. So these are the situation in which the production is stopped, and then we can see how these two terms are different and what they are applied for. So shutdown, it's a short-run decision not to produce anything because of market condition. So shutdown, first, it's a short-run decision. So you are temporarily suspending your production of goods and services. And why you are doing it? Because the market conditions are such, so you're just shutting down your firm, and that's different from exit. Exit is a long run decision to leave the market. So when we use the term exit, that means that you basically sell out your all assets, your production equipment and everything, and you close down your business for forever. So you completely leave the market, and that is a long run decision. And short run, probably the market condition is not good. I don't know, people are not buying milk, for example, or there is any type of disaster happening with the milk production, so temporarily you shut down your production for a short time. But exit would be that you sell out all your cattle and all your asset and machinery, and then that's a long run decision. So what are the differences between shutdown and exit? One key difference is if shutdown is in short run, so if you are shutting down in short run, you must still pay for fixed cost. So fixed cost, we have covered costs in the last chapter. These fixed costs are those costs which does not change in the short run. It doesn't change how much you produce in the short run. It could be, for example, the rent of the building or the land that you are using for production or for farming purposes. So these are the costs that you cannot change in a short run. So if you are shutting down, if you shut down your farm of a dairy product, that means that you are still paying the cost for the farm that you have hired or the land that you are using. You are not producing, but still you incur your fixed cost. If exit in long run, then the cost will be zero. So, but if you completely exit the market, you will sell out everything. You will no longer pay, for example, for the rent of your factory or the farmland that you are using. Why? Because you don't have any more fixed cost. You have sold everything. You have got rid of everything. So that's the two differences between shutdown and exit. Okay, and now we will see in which condition should a firm shut down. So should a firm shut down in the short run? So how do you decide to shut down in a short run? You will see cost of shutting down. What happens is if you shut down your business, you will lose your total revenue. So if you are not producing milk anymore, you are not receiving any revenue at all. And what is the benefit of shutting down is that you save on costs. So you save on your variable cost. You are still paying your fixed cost, but you are saving on your variable cost. Variable cost, as an example, would be the cost of hiring employees or the monthly salary that you are paying to employees who work in the farm, for example. So if you shut down, you are saving on your variable cost, but you are still paying for your fixed cost. So you should shut down, and if your total revenue is smaller than your variable cost, or when your price is smaller than average variable cost. To put it in a simple words, if your total revenue is not covering your variable cost, then it is good for you to shut down. Why? Because even you cannot pay for example, for your employees. So at least if you shut down, you are not paying any cost or you're not paying any salary to your employees, and in that way it is beneficial for you to shut down. So in this graph we will see how in the short run how a firms decide to supply. So if prices above the average variable cost, then firm produces Q, where price equals marginal cost. So a firm will only produce in the short run if it's able to cover its variable cost, and in that case its average variable cost. So in that case only the red line, which is shown as a marginal cost, that is basically the supply curve. So any production below the average variable cost will not happen because that's not profitable and the firm is not covering its variable cost. So that's why the firm will shut down and not produce. So if the price is lower than average variable cost, then the firm shut down and does not produce anything. So that means that in the short run, the supply curve of a firm is the marginal cost curve, which is the above average variable cost. Okay, this is a new concept and it's quite interesting. It's called sunk cost, and we will see what it is. A cost that has already been committed and cannot be recovered. So if you're starting a business and then at first you have to pay a cost which you will not cover later on, that's basically your sunk cost. So if you're making any decision for your business and your personal life, you should ignore the sunk cost when making decision. Why? Because it's a cost already incurred, so that really shouldn't affect your decision because it's already past. So it's a cost that you cannot recover. It's already has happened. And for your future decision of production, for example, you should not consider your sunk cost. So that's basically you must pay them regardless of your choices. So it's the cost that you have to pay it, and that does not change anything about your decision. So in the short run, fixed costs are sunk cost. For example, if you're producing milk and you have hired a factory or a farm dairy and you're paying that, for example, yearly rent. So if you decide in a specific month to produce or not to produce, your fixed cost, that is your rent, should not play any role because you are paying that anyway. So you will pay that anyway if you produce or not produce in the short run. Your fixed costs are sunk cost and they should not affect your decision about production. So fixed costs should not matter in the decision of to shut down. So that's why we only focus on the variable cost because that's what it matters. Now, in the long run, things are different. Should a firm exit or enter in the long run? So what happens if you want to exit an industry or exit the market? So we will see what are the costs and what are the benefits of doing that. So what happens is that when you shut down, the cost of exiting market is that you will lose your total revenue. So the cost is that if you're leaving the market, you are no longer able to generate revenue. So you lose your total revenue. And what benefits you receive? The benefits of exiting market, it's basically you save costs. So you save your total cost, and in the long run, your fixed cost is zero. So when you are deciding about exiting a market at all, so you will no longer be paying your fixed cost as well. So if you exit the market, for example, you don't have to pay your yearly farm rent. So if you want to exit a business or if you want to stay in the business, you will see if your total revenue is smaller than your total cost. So if you are planning to exit the market, you should do that when your total revenue is smaller than total cost. So total cost includes your variable cost and fixed cost, and if you are not able to cover your total cost, so your revenue is smaller, then you should exit the market. And that's how basically you will not incur further losses. I'm not sure if I said it correctly. So the second bullet point is benefit of exiting market. So what you save is your total cost. So if you exit the market, you save both on the total cost, which includes your fixed cost and variable cost. So that was a small correction if I haven't said it rightly. Okay, we can also turn around this concept and we can say like, okay, one should enter the market if the total revenue is greater than the total cost. So if you think that in a market you will make your revenue will be more than your total cost or than your costs, then you should enter that market, and that in that way you will save or you will profit from entering the market. Okay, so we will see in this graph we can see the competitive firms' long-run supply curve. So in the long run, the firm will only produce if it is able to cover its total cost. So any point which is above the long run average total cost, that's basically the supply curve of a firm. So the straight line that you see on MC line is the long run supply curve of a firm, and that's where the firm will produce. So the firm's long run supply curve is the portion of its marginal cost curve above the long run average total cost. So it's another active learning exercise, and you're asked to find the firm's profit. So anything above the average total cost and below the price is basically the profit. So in this case, you can pause the video and figure it out yourself or solution. So this area is the profit area, and it's basically price minus average total cost. So it's basically the difference between your revenue and costs. So if your costs are lower than your revenue, in that case you will make profit. So in this case your average total cost is 6 euros, but the price is 10 euros. So by producing any unit you will receive $4 of profit, and if you produce 50 of that product, then you will have a profit of $4 per each quantity. So the profit per unit here is $4, and if you are producing 20, so your profit will be $200. Yeah, so this shaded area is your profit. So you multiply the differences in price minus average total cost multiplied by quantity. Now we see a different situation. In this case, you see that the average total cost, so the cost of producing a specific unit, is above the market price. It's above the marginal revenue. So your cost is much more higher than the average revenue that you're receiving, or your marginal revenue. So in this case, you see the average total cost curve is at 5. So your cost is $5 for producing a product, and the price or your marginal revenue is $3. So your cost is $2 more than your revenue. And this area between average total cost and marginal revenue is basically the firm's loss. So you will incur a $2 of losses per unit. And if you multiply 2 by 30 quantities, that will be your loss, that is 60. Okay, let's see market supply. What are the assumptions? So what we have assumed so far is that all existing firms and potential entrants have identical costs. So of course different firms they don't have the same cost. Probably some of them have lower cost, others have more cost. So that was one assumption, which is not basically true for the real world. So in real case, different firms has different costs. And we also assume that each firm's cost does not change as another firms enter or exit the market. So we say like the costs are fixed and it doesn't affect when the other firms enter the market. But in reality, that's also not the case. Why? Because when there is more firm entering into one market, they will compete for the limited resources available. For example, if there are more dairy production firms, they will compete for, I don't know, for disqualified people who can work in this farm, or they will compete for farmland or for cattle and so on. The number of firms in the market is fixed in the short run and variable in the long run. So we assume that in the short run, firms, the number of firms is fixed, but in the long run, it could be changed. So these were the three assumptions that we have made. And we can see how these assumptions could change our explanations that we have made so far. The short-run market supply curve. So we say that as long as price is greater than average variable cost, we should produce. Each firm will produce its profit maximizing quantity where marginal revenue equal marginal cost. Okay, there is a recall from chapter 4. It says like at each price the market quantity supplied is the sum of the quantities supplied by all firms. That means that when we are talking about the market supply, we add up all the supplies of individual firms. And it's basically we add up which firm will produce how much at the given market price. So at each price, the market quantity supplied is the sum of quantities supplied by all firms. Remember, now we are talking about market supply, not a firm's individual supply. So in order to see how much milk will be produced in an economy, we will add up the supply of each individual firms. We will see, and then that will show us our market supply curve. So in this example, there are 1,000 identical firms, and this is one firm's supply curve at the given prices. And then basically we add up all these supply curve of this, because all the firms are identical, so basically we multiply the same quantities by 1,000. And the main reason for this is that you should get the idea that there is difference between one firm supply curve and the market supply curve. So the market supply curve is basically the supply curve of all different firms put together, and of course different firms will produce different quantities based on the different price levels. So the market supply curve will add up all the supply curve of individual firm, and that's how we will reach up to the market supply curve. So as you can see, this S line determines or shows the market supply curve. So in the long run, the number of firms can change due to entry and exit. So individual firms in the short run, they can enter or they can exit the market, so the number of firms will change. If existing firms earn positive economic profit. So what decides that in the long run firm will enter or exit the market? One condition is that if existing firms earn positive economic profit, new firm will enter. So new firms enter, and short-run market supply shift to the right. So what happened is that if their people are making positive economic profit, so positive economic profit is a profit. We will come to that later, but it's like you're receiving extra economic profit by being in a business in the market. And then if you're making, let's say you're making a very good amount of profit, and in the short run what will happen, that new firm will enter that market. For example, due to any reason the situation has changed in a way that dairy milk producers, they are receiving higher profits, or their profit are increasing. So that's an attraction for new firms to enter the market. So what happens, that new firms enter in the market in the short run. And that's why, because new firms will enter, they will also produce more, so their supply will also shift to the right. So the market supply will increase. If price falls, so reducing profits and slowing entry. So what happens is that if the price falls, then that will basically reduce profits for the companies, and as a result, new firms will not enter to the market. So what happens when existing firms incur losses? Of course, some firm will exit, and as a result, short-run market supply will shift to the left. Why? Because there will be less supply in the market. And as a result, prices will rise, and reducing remaining firms' losses. So the firms that they have been in the market, their losses will be reduced. So basically, through these mechanisms, the market will reach finally its equilibrium. If there are firms already in the market, they are making good profit, so new firms will enter into the market, and the supply will shift to the right. And as a result of that shift, the price will fall, so there is more producer, and then the price will fall. And that, as a result of that, the firm's profit will reduce, and then new firms will not enter to the market. Other way around, if existing firms are incurring losses, so some of them will leave, and as a result, the supply will shift to the left. So there will be less supply of milk, for example, and as a result of little supply of milk, the prices will eventually rise. And when the prices will rise, so the remaining firms will not incur losses anymore. So as a result, these mechanisms will ensure that the market is in equilibrium in the long run. And that's happening through entry and exit. So what happens in the long run equilibrium? The process of entry or exit is complete. So this mechanism is completed in the long run, and the remaining firms earn zero economic profit. So they are making profit but not extra profit. And what do we mean by economic profit? If you remember, there is a difference between economic profit and accounting profit. So accounting profit does not consider implicit costs, but in economic profit we also consider implicit costs. And that's why even if a firm is making zero economic profit, they have the motivation to stay in the market. Why? Because they are paid for their opportunity cost of their implicit cost. To put it in an example, so if a person is running a business, he's also working as a manager, so he's not receiving any salary from himself, and that's an implicit cost. But if a firm is having zero economic profit, that means that this implicit cost of this person working is also paid for. So he is also receiving, for example, his salary or the benefit of his salary as compared to if he was working in another firm or if he was employed outside the firm. So to put it in simple words, for example, the manager who is working in his own company, he would make 1,000 euros per month as a salary. But if he's working in his own firm, so this 1,000 will be considered as an implicit cost. So he's compensated for this cost if the firm is still making a zero economic profit. So zero economic profit is when prices equals the average total cost. And since firms produce where prices equals marginal revenue and that equals marginal cost, the zero profit condition is that firms will make a zero profit when prices equals marginal cost, and that's equal to average total cost. That will be clear when we see it in the graph. So recall that the marginal cost intersects average total cost at the minimum of average total cost. So hence in the long run, price equals the minimum average total cost. It will be if we see it in this graph, hopefully later. Okay, zero profit condition. Why do competitive firms stay in business if they make zero profit? I tried to explain it before, but let's see if this example could help us. So profit equals total revenue minus total cost, and total cost includes all implicit cost like the opportunity cost of the owner's time and money. And zero economic equilibrium, basically the economic profit is zero, but the accounting profit is still positive. So that's why firms will remain in the market even if they say receive zero economic profit. Why? Because the opportunity cost of the owner time and money is being paid for in economic profit. It is zero, but it's included in. So the salary of the owner is included, and then the money that he has invested. So the interest rate, for example, if he would have put that money in a bank, that interest is being paid in zero economic profit. Okay, so here is the graph, and in the long run, the market supply curve is basically above the long run average total cost. Now we can see it here. So and what we can learn from this is that at the point where the marginal cost intersects long run average total cost, that's basically the point where average total cost is minimum. We will come to this point in the coming chapters as well, but as you can see in the graph, the curve which shows the long run average total cost, it's the minimum at this point where the marginal cost curve passes through it. So the price is basically where the average total cost is the minimum, or the marginal, I will put it in other words, is that the average total cost is minimum at the point where marginal cost curves cross this average total cost. So at this intersection, the average variable cost is minimum. So that's why in the long run, the market supply curve is horizontal. So in the long run, the supply curve is a straight line, because that's the supply curve of the firms, and that's how the firm decide to produce. So, and if there is a change in price, they will either leave the market or stay out of the market. But in the long run, that shows that the long run supply curve of the market is completely elastic, and that equals the price of that product. So the long run market supply curve is horizontal at the P, that's the price, and that is minimum average total cost. So that point is, the price is the point where the average total cost is minimum. Then also the quantity has changed from Q1 to Q3. So we said that long run supply curve is horizontal if all firms have identical cost and all costs do not change as other firms enter or exit the market. So these were the conditions. Long run supply curve might slope upward. So in some cases these conditions are not met, and as a result the supply curve is upward, has a upward slope. For example, if firms have different costs, so if the costs are different for different firms, the supply curve will change, so it will be shown as a sloping upward. Or cost rise as firms enter the market. So when more firms are entering a market, they compete for limited inputs, and as a result the cost of these inputs increase, and that's basically increase in the cost. So as a result, the supply curve will increase upward. What that means is that firm will only produce if the prices are increasing to cover for this extra cost that they are paying. So what happens is that as price rises, firms with lower costs enter the market before those with higher cost. So we said that firms has different costs, and when the prices increases, those firms which has lower cost, first they will enter the market. And as the price increases, those firms who has higher costs, they will also enter the market. And as a result, the quantity of product supplied increases. So that's why in the long run, the market supply curve slopes upward. Why some cost rises as more firm enters the market? As I said, there could be specific resources which are limited, and firms will compete for obtaining these resources. For example, the amount of land suitable for farming is fixed, and firms will compete for this land, and that will raise the price of farming land. So as a result, because firms are paying much more higher costs for their inputs, that will increase the cost for all firms. So that's why in the long run, in order to increase the supply of quantity, there is need for the price to be raised, and that's an indication of why the supply curve is upward slope. So efficiency of a competitive market. Basically, when a firm, as it is the case in competitive market, produces at the level where price equals marginal revenue, or when the prices equals the marginal cost, that's basically a condition where the total surplus is maximum. So the consumer surplus and producer surplus are maximum when the price equals the marginal cost. A marginal cost is the cost of producing the marginal unit, and the P is the value to buyers of the marginal unit. So probably it's easy to give an example. So if you're buying a laptop, and the cost of producing that laptop is, say, for example, 500 euros. So that's the marginal cost, and that equals the price of that laptop. So it means that the company has paid $500 or euros to produce that specific computer. And you also value that computer by 500. So there is no loss of value in this transaction, so to say, or there is no deadweight loss, or there is no extra profit going to the company because of this transaction. Why? Because the price reflects basically the marginal cost to the firm, so that's how much the firm has incurred cost to produce that laptop. And the benefits, or the value that you receive as a consumer, you also value that product at $500. And that's why in a competitive market, it's always the efficient. It's an efficient market. So a competitive market is always efficient, and we will come to know this point when we compare this with monopoly and other situations when these market structures are not efficient, and we will talk about them in the next chapter, especially in the case of monopoly, and probably that will be much easier to comprehend this point. A quick review of what we have covered. So a competitive firm is a price taker, and its revenue is proportional to the amount of output it produces. So the price is already taken. How much is your revenue is determined by how much you produce. And we also talked that in a competitive market, price equals marginal revenue, and that equals average revenue. And we also said that the firm's marginal cost curve is also the supply curve. And in the short run, a firm cannot recover its fixed cost, so it's a sunk cost. Shutdown is a temporary closure, and it happens only if the price is lower than average variable cost. In the long run, a firm can recover both fixed and variable cost, so it will exit if price is lower than average total cost. So in the long run, we consider total cost. In short run, we consider variable cost. In a market with free entry and exit, profit is driven to zero in the long run. So we see, like, through the mechanisms of exit and entry, the market becomes in equilibrium in the long run, and the profit is driven to zero, the economic profit, of course. All firm produces at efficient scale, and that's the point where the average total cost is minimum, and that's the point where the price of that product is. The number of firms adjust to satisfy the quantity demanded at this price. So the number of firms adjusts to satisfy the quantity demanded at this price. So only firms will produce if they are able to have this average total cost. And when there is change in demand, it has different effects in the short run and also in the long run. In the short run, an increase in demand raises prices and leads to profit. So in the short run, because other firms cannot just enter and produce, what happens is that the prices are increased, and that generates profit for the firm, and also the other way around. And in the long run, the market basically returns to the zero profit equilibrium, where firms will only make zero economic profit.